Thank you so much for joining us today. I am from Liana Technologies, and I am, just to give you a quick introduction of who we are. Liana Technologies, we are a marketing tools provider. So we help companies with their marketing efforts, and our goal is really to empower your efforts and make your life as marketers easy. Liana Technologies actually kind of offers a wide solution with email marketing, automation, PR, and media, websites, or e-commerce. Today, our subject really is going to be focusing within the, you can see our customer journey, and where we are going to be focusing on is PR and media. Now, we actually have a couple poll questions for you today, and we're going to hit our first question. Azra, if you just bring that up. So today, what I want to know is, have you ever used a digital tool to manage your press release? And you guys can go ahead and vote. And we'll just wait a minute to see how those answers come out. And so just to, while everyone's, we'll just wait a minute while everyone's slowly answering those questions. And then Azra, can you just go ahead and give me a note? We'll just wait a minute, and then maybe we'll go ahead and have a look at that poll. Okay, and so we can see here about a quarter of you, are using an actual press release tool. The other quarter they've tried one out, but they're not so sure exactly how it works. And then actually the rest of you have never used any tool to manage your press release. And just to give you a short introduction on how we help with PR and media, we actually provide a tool called Liana Press, which helps you manage your contact database and also effectively communicate with the press. I won't really go into too many details, because today we're really focusing on how do we write to the press and how do we communicate. And Cruz will be going in that in a lot more detail. But just a quick overview is that we help you manage your contact database. We actually build a contact database globally for different press agencies for you to contact. And we make the act of contacting and sending out your press release into the world easy. And that's really what we strive to do. And now for the main content of our webinar today, I'm going to pass it over to Cruzanne, or Cruz for short. Cruz, you can go ahead and start sharing your screen now. Oh, and you're muted.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. And thank you, Azra, for the introduction. It's my pleasure to be chatting to you this afternoon about writing press releases. My name is Cruzanne McCallaghan. I am the creative director of the Quick Word Company, and I am a copywriter. So this is press release writing is something that I do all the time. Can you just testing, everyone can see my screen, how to write a winning press release? Yes. Fantastic. Okay, great. So firstly, we're going to talk a little bit about what a press release actually is. So a press release is a piece of written communication that reports specific but brief information, that's going to be important later, about an event, circumstance, or other happening. What a press release is not is an advertisement, an article, or a guarantee of media coverage, which is why people write press releases. Before we go any further, we have one more poll question, and I'd just like to know, I think if someone could pull that up for everyone, whether or not you write your own press releases, you have any experience writing press releases. I'd love to see that. Right, so while everyone's doing that, I'm sure we can pull up the results of those in a little while. So moving on. One of the most important things about writing a press release is about knowing your audience. And often this means knowing your targeted audience and the audience of a publication. So when we send a press release out, we're often, there's exciting poll results coming in. So do you or your team write press releases? Great. So, that's fantastic to see. The majority of people here write them out frequently and write them themselves and send them out. That's wonderful to hear. That will make this content even more useful. Fantastic. So it's important to know your audience, and that's knowing who your customers are versus who the publication's readers are. They might be the same audience or they might be different, but it's very important to be aware of that before you start writing. you want to consider the content type and the final editorial style. So if you are, for example, quite a playful brand and you are targeting a very professional financial publication, you may need to know who is reading the way that you write your press release, and you may need to change the tone of voice and the editorial style you're writing in. You want to be targeted when you write a press release, and you want to have different angles for, ideally have different angles for the same story. And you may need to, depending on the audience and depending on the publication, prioritize your information differently. We're going to get into all of this in a little bit more detail later, so don't panic. Now, here is a few editor pet peeves. So I've had the pleasure and the experience of working on both sides of the divide between, I've worked in the media and received press releases, and I've been someone in a PR capacity and as a writer sending press releases. And I can tell you that the editors do have pet peeves when it comes to press releases. Now, firstly, the biggest complaint is probably that they're too long. Press releases should not be pages and pages and pages of information. You shouldn't be sending out a tiny mini Bible of information about your event or service. Other people have said that they can be too creative. That means that maybe they're in terms of the style of the way they're written. A lot of complaints are that the content isn't relevant to their publication, which means that the person sending and writing the press release has not thought about the audience and the people receiving at the end. Another is that the press release, oh, sorry, one more second, I'll go back. The other is that the press release is missing important information. So press releases are quite functional pieces of writing. They're not articles, they're not advertisements, creative adverts, they're not even social media content. Press releases have a purpose, they're informative, and you want someone to spread the word. That's why you're sending them. Another pet peeve is that they don't know anything about this company. So they're receiving a press release about something from somebody they've never heard of, and they don't know what to do with that information. And the final pet peeve that is also a big one is, why now? Why am I receiving this press release now? Currency is very important when we talk about press release writing. So let's look a little bit at the structure of a press release. Now, you can come back to this if you want to take a screen grab or write it down. This is what I would say is probably the most general and important structure for a press release. We have a headline, a subheading, date and location. Incredibly important for people who are, if you imagine you're an editor, you've got a busy full inbox in your email and you're scanning for information that you want to be able to put into your publication. You need to know it's current. You need to know if this is still relevant. And so it's important to put a location and a date in your press release. Then we have what we call as the opening paragraph. Then we have the body copy. We can have quotes within that body copy, or we can have quotes underneath the body copy. Then we have a boilerplate. If you're not sure what a boilerplate is, we're going to talk about that a bit later. Contact information, incredibly important, and any images. So that's when we talk about a press release, that is the structure we're kind of dealing with. Firstly, let's talk about headlines. Headlines are all about making a good first impression. As you can imagine, if you're an editor and the amount of time that is spent on making a good headline for a news item or a magazine article, headlines are all about capturing attention, and that is just as true for a press release as anything else. When we talk about headlines, it's important to talk about using active voice. That means saying that something will happen, has happened, as opposed to saying something has happened to something else. We clarify that a little bit later. You want to use impressive statistics or numbers that are eye-catching. You want to paint a picture. You want people to visualize what you're doing. You want to have trigger words in a positive way. You want to have words that people are going to snap onto, and maybe that kind of a clickbait element to that will help people want to understand more and read more. Oopsie, sorry. Oops, I did a thing. Okay. You want to find a balance between striking confidence and curiosity. That means leaving a little bit enough to the imagination that people open your press release and read your press release, while also seeming confident you know what you're talking about and the information is credible. You want to use contemporary language, and as I mentioned, that kind of clickbait element. And you want to stay away from industry jargon. We don't want these things to, like, you may know terms that sound really, terms in your own industry that sound like, oh, people say this all the time, may not be true for other places. So we need to be a bit more empathetic and put ourselves in the shoes of our audience. And the other thing with a headline is to make it the last thing that you do. So I usually, when I'm writing press releases, will put kind of like a placeholder headline that I think is like something I kind of want to want to use. And then once I've finished writing the press release, I go back again and rewrite that headline and tweak it and shape it to make sure it really accurately reflects the tone and content of the press release I've written. So here's a few examples of some pretty snappy headlines. The top one here, when we go back and we see using impressive numbers to capture attention. We have Tesla delivers 17,400 vehicles in Q4 2015. The total 2015 deliveries were 50,580. That's like a lot of numbers. I mean, obviously, I'm sure Tesla's done a lot better than that now. This is quite an old headline, but you see what I mean. When we talk about having a little bit of curiosity and a little bit of style, you've got from car to coffee, quicker than ever. Dunkin' Donuts is the first brand to launch Waze's order ahead feature. So that's a bit of a playful headline. Then we've got something a little bit more abstract. Desire starts with discovery. What is that? And you read on and you see the subheader there. And another one is hangover recovery is your new drinking buddy. So it's very direct address. It's very conversational. It's to the point. You know it's a product because it has the registered trademark symbol. So that kind of piques your curiosity as well. So that's headlines. Now, as you can see with these two bottom examples, they also have subheadings. So we're going to talk a little bit about subheadings. If your headline is cryptic, subheading can be an opportunity to demystify it and clarify what exactly it is you're talking about. And if your heading is functional, if your heading is functional, oh my goodness me, it's a very sensitive mouse. If your heading is functional, subheading is a chance to have a bit of fun. And it's an important way, subheading is really a short summary of kind of everything that you're going to be saying in your press release. So as we can see here, back at our headlines again, where we have Desire starts with discovery, the Love Hotel online boutique launches an enviable collection of coveted international brands featuring products designed for personal pleasure. It's like, obviously that we understand what that means now. So when we have a bit of context to the headline, and as the hangover recovery example shows, Nilo Brands creates hangover recovery, an all natural FDA compliant hangover remedy. So that's really, we're understanding that as well. Now, here's a few more examples of good subheaders. So we have at the top one, that's a very functional heading, which says launching Kelly Hoppin's highly anticipated inaugural furniture collection retrospective. That's a very functional one. We know there's somebody called Kelly Hoppin, they've launched something, and the subheader gives us a bit more information. Kelly Hoppin, MBE, collaborates with Resource Decor for an exclusive furniture collection inspired by her 40 years in the industry. That is already going to pique a lot of curiosity because it gives a lot of a taste of all the things that can be in the press release. Similarly, if we go down to materials au natural, where precious stones, marble and wood pieces bring organic warmth and premium touches to Indigo Living's autumn-winter 2016 trends. So it's probably an important thing to note at this stage that what you want to be doing with a press release is also making an editor's life easier. Editors are really, really busy and they get inundated with, well, you could say useless information quite a lot of the time. Everybody wants somebody to say something about what they want them to say it about. You want to make their job as easy as possible, and that means being as professional as possible and compelling as possible in the way that you're writing your press release. So if you can see this bottom example as well, get ready for more Grana. Hong Kong's hottest new retail concept is popping up in Causeway Bay. Now that's got a lot of compelling, triggering words in it. Hottest new retail concept. That's one of those things that you think, oh, I'm keen. It's got the name of the brand there, Grana, so we can understand that. We have a location, Causeway Bay. And if we look at the subheading, it gives us a little bit more information and also will pique an editor's interest because we're thinking like an editor. We're thinking about when they need to put their content, what kind of content they need to create. So Grana, the online clothing retailer known for its affordable luxury grade quality apparel, is opening a pop-up shop in Causeway Bay just in time for Christmas. So maybe if you're an editor and you're writing Christmas content, this is just going to pique your interest a little bit. If we go back to the original structure I shared about a press release, once we've done our header and our subheader, we've got our date and location, which you can usually write. I'll show you some examples in a minute. And then we have our opening paragraph. Your opening paragraph is everything about your press release in a nutshell. This is what makes a press release kind of a bit counterintuitive sometimes if you're used to writing quite interesting articles and things, because essentially you write the whole press release in a tiny paragraph, and then you go on to talk about it in a very similar way to the way that you wrote about it in a tiny in the small opening paragraph. It is your press release content in a nutshell. It's a micro summary of everything in the press release. So what I would say is, look at the sentence you wrote originally, a one sentence subheader, for example, of what this press release is about and why you're doing it. Don't worry about a little bit of repetition. So if you know that you're going to say, you may in your opening paragraph say something similar to your subheading, and you may also go on in the body copy of your press release to say something similar again. It kind of goes against everything we talk about as writers, where you don't want to be too repetitive, because when we talk about press releases, it's about making sure that that key information is shared. Having said that, you don't want to be repetitive in a way that's not useful. You want an opening paragraph to be an easy micro summary that someone could copy and paste and share as easily as possible. But you are also, in your opening paragraph, wanting to get to the point of your press release as quickly as possible. And you want to make it current. You want to make it something important. You don't want to say in your opening paragraph, I'm showing this press release about a restaurant launch that's happening in 6 months' time, because it's not current, it's not relevant, and it sound and for example, if something happened 6 months ago, you're like, we want to share that this really cool thing happened with our brand. We had a brand collaboration 6 months ago. Nobody's going to care now. So make sure that you're keeping that content really current and relevant in that opening paragraph, and pull the important information up to the top. Again, think like an editor, make their job easy. Here we can see an example. So this is a press release from Whole Foods Market in the US. So Whole Foods Market kicks off the new year with store-wide supplement sale, January 4th to January 6th. Everything you need to know is in that heading. And of course, a little bit of extra information in the subheading, which is great as well. All brands of vitamins, mineral, protein powder, and other supplements, 25% off for 3 days only. So we can see that it's very current. It's very current because it's 25% for 3 days only. And we can see this specific date here. Oopsie, stop clicking. The specific date here, January 4th to January 6th. And then if we go down to the opening paragraph of that press release, we can see the location, Austin, Texas. As we said, we've got to start with our date and location. And we can see our date, December 31st, 2018. So we know this is going out 5 days before the supplement sale starts, which again might be a little bit quick. But of course, this is FMCG, like fast moving consumer goods shopping. That kind of content goes around quite quickly too. So they're not saying this is going to happen 3 months' time, because an editor is going to forget. This is something quick and easy an editor can remember. So there you have the opening paragraph, which literally says Whole Foods Market is encouraging its shoppers to start off the new year right by stocking up on their favorite supplements during a special 3-day sale starting January 4th. That sentence has already repeated content in the heading and the subheading, and it's okay. During the sale, all supplements at Whole Foods Market will be 25% off, including all brands of vitamins, minerals, powders, and probiotics. Prime members can also enjoy an additional 10% off the discounted price. Now, that sentence before about the 25% off the different vitamins, minerals, powders, and probiotics is exactly what the subheading says, but it doesn't sound repetitive because we're doing it in the opening paragraph, which makes it easy for an editor to chop that out and paste it somewhere if they need to for a publication. The header and the subheader are really to capture some of the editor's attention, maybe get them thinking as well. And that opening paragraph is almost doing the editor's job for them and being able to write something that they can share really easily. So here's another couple of examples of opening paragraphs. As you can see, we've got dates and locations for each of them: January, New York; July, San Francisco. We've also prioritizing those brand names. Who is this press release about? What is this information about? We have Allbirds in the bottom example. Allbirds, the San Francisco-based shoe brand, making comfortable footwear using innovative, sustainable materials. Like, we know exactly what that brand is. So even if someone's picking up this press release and goes, I don't know this company, they now know what that company is. And same for Zola, the wedding company that'll do anything for love. And it's very clear what that means. So those opening paragraphs both have specific information that's really easy to understand. And you'd go to the rest of the press release for more, but really you have it in a nutshell. A really important thing when we talk about press releases is about writing with brevity. So brevity is a fun word. Brevity. It's a delightful word, actually. And it's a noun. And it basically means the concise and exact use of words in writing or speech. You probably know some people who text with brevity, or people who definitely don't text with brevity. People who have kind of like run-on sentences and nothing seems to end. And then other people go, yep, okay, I will see you at 6. That kind of thing. So brevity is very important in press release writing, because we have to remember who you are sending a press release to. You are sending it to editors and publications, and they don't have a lot of time. So you need to make sure you're writing with brevity. That also means not using particularly flowery language or over the top language, because you want things to be clearly understood and interpreted. How do we write with brevity? You stick to the point. You write out in one sentence why you are writing this press release. Do that. That's a great exercise before you begin. Why are you writing this press release now? Then make sure you write in short sentences. So try not to put comma, 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 comma. It's much easier to write in short sentences. It's a lot more reader friendly, and you're going to be less likely to be misinterpreted. And if you're struggling a little bit, write as you would speak to a new friend. So imagine you're catching up with someone you haven't really seen very much of before. And how would you talk to them about what you want to say? Look at that one sentence that you wrote about why you're writing a press release, and see how you would speak it to someone. You want to write carefully and concisely, but you don't want to be too familiar. You don't want to be saying, hey, babes, let me tell you about this hot deal. Like, hey, I'd love to share with you some information about what's happening XYZ. So make sure you are respectful, clear, and friendly. Another way to ensure brevity is to make sure you don't waste words. Write in the simplest terms and eliminate unnecessary words. So I think sometimes, and maybe it's a hang up from when we were at school and we did creative writing at school, we all tend to write in this like fancy way. Sometimes we kind of exercise our writing style, and we use things like actually, currently, really, literally, which are adverbs, or adjectives. We say very, really, real, or simple, or we use other filler words like perhaps, pretty, like pretty much, or now, or that, in order, just, maybe. And this can be, it's a really easy way to eliminate some waste words, is to go through and try and simplify. We can also use what we call real words. So again, instead of kind of being a little bit more flowery, instead of saying ways by which, we can just say ways. Continues to be, we can say remains. In order to, you can just say to. Despite the fact that, although, at which time, say when. In spite of, despite. When it comes to, in or when, work and said. The majority of shoppers would say, just say most shoppers. You've already cut a lot of words there. A number of, we can say some, few, several, or various. And leverage. Leverage is a nice corporate word we all use. Leverage just means to use, harness, or apply. So just say use, harness, or apply. And you'll find that you have a lot more brevity and clarity in the way that you're writing. Another important point when it comes to brevity, as mentioned at the beginning, is about active voice. And if you learn to love active voice, you're going to do really well with press release writing. In an active voice, the subject of the sentence performs the action of the verb. In a passive voice, the subject receives the action of the verb. So the doer of the action is in the subject position at the beginning of the sentence when we have an active voice. Oopsie. No, so just, oopsie, sorry, my mistake. So in a way, let's think about what that actually means. So let's have a look at some examples of active and passive voice. A passive voice, the event was attended by 500 people. So here we've made the, if we go back, we've made we're not making the subject of the sentence perform the action. The subject is receiving the action. So we have the event was attended by 500 people. It's receiving the action. We want it to perform the action. So 500 people attended the event. That's what we've made the sentence. It's more active. I hope everyone's clear on that. In the second example, the new CEO was appointed by the business. That's passive because the subject is not performing the action in the sentence. An active version would be the business appointed the new CEO. You can see from these two mint green examples that they're just a lot clearer and more confident. It just sounds that little bit crisper, which is what we're really aiming for when we're doing our press release writing. Now we go on to body copy. This is kind of the bulk of the press release, if you like. And we see we've gone all through this and we haven't even gotten to the bulk of the press release yet. Now, body copy. The rule is, if it's important, put it up the top, put it up in the opening paragraph. Similar to newspaper articles, which you'll find whenever you read a newspaper article, information should be less important the further down that you read, and extra details should be towards the bottom. The body copy is where we can have color and extra content. And we want to look at how to weave together details naturally with editorial flair. Essentially, if an editor likes your opening paragraph and you've piqued their curiosity with your header and your subheader, they're going to read your body copy and they're going to hopefully take some of that information and want to elaborate on it themselves and write an article. That would be delightful, right? Because then that's how you get some publicity. So let's talk a little bit more about body copy. One thing to remember is to make your press release accessible. Now, if you've tried to take to heart some of the points about writing with brevity, that will inform a lot of the way that you write your press release and how accessible it is. So that's good. Make sure you note your brand guidelines versus the publication's brand guidelines. And I've got quite an interesting example to share with you in a while about that when it hasn't worked out as well. Remember that your tone of voice is important, but don't let it be too overpowering. And if you think about it, you're writing as you said, as if you were meeting a new friend and talking to them. And can you imagine how obnoxious you would sound if you were very, very over the top in speaking to a new friend in that way? And also, don't sacrifice clarity. Don't try and embellish things. You just want to get that information through as clearly as possible. Here's an example of a brand. Here's an example of a brand that maybe hasn't worked with their brand guidelines versus the publication's brand guidelines. So this particular brand, Kozo, part of their brand guidelines is to have lowercase for everything. So they don't use, if you can see here, they don't use uppercase letters for the starts of sentences or for headings or anything like that. That's stylized for them. And that's because their brand name is lowercase. That's the way they write their brand name. Now, the problem is when you send this in this style to an editor and it doesn't follow the conventions of a press release, they don't realize that you're just writing it as your brand guidelines would say. It looks incomplete. It looks poorly formatted. It's quite confusing. You don't know where the header is. You don't know if this is where the sentence starts. So even though it might be quite stylish and in line with the brand guidelines of this brand, it doesn't really work in terms of you're creating a lot of confusion. You're sacrificing a lot of clarity with the editor. Now, you may argue, okay, well, the brand name has a lowercase letter that starts it. So we want to make sure that they remember to write it with a lowercase. If it's correct in the press release, if you write the brand name with a lowercase in the press release, that's how an editor will write it. They will go off what you've given them. So don't worry about that. It's really important in a press release, as I mentioned 100 times, to make it easy for an editor. We want to make it so easy for an editor to pick up that information and pop it on a page for you. That means you are responsible for doing the hard work when it comes to a press release. All the boring bits are your responsibility. That means technical information. That means quotations from people, prices, statistics. That has to be correct and accurate, and you are responsible for it. So the worst, an editor is not going to come unless it's like something really, really, really compelling. It's very unlikely an editor is going to come to you and dig around saying, could you give me your 2014 quarterly results? They won't. You need to give them exactly what it is that they need to do their job. Here's an example of how you can do that in a way that's not super boring and makes it easy for an editor. This paragraph talks about interior design products, so homeware. It says spring is the perfect time to introduce textiles that won't stifle a space during hot summer months. And then what we have here is our product name, the Grampian Ebony Floor Rug. So we know that the official name of the product, Grampian Ebony, because it's been highlighted in bold. We know that's the name of the product, and an editor will know that. We know it's a floor rug because we've called it a floor rug. We didn't just call it the Grampian Ebony and leave it at that. And then we have the price. In the currency, it's relevant, and the price is right there. And there's a description of it. It's comfortably cool underfoot. So we have the information here. We have the name of the product, we have the type of product, and we have the price of the product and a description of the product, which makes an editor's job really, really easy. And you can see that with the other two examples here, Park Avenue Blue Queen Bed Set, which is self-explanatory. Rumba Light Grey Throw, again, self-explanatory. A soft, smooth, and light additions to your spring linen lineup. So all the information is there. Here you can see a bit more of a technical example of a press release. And you've got all these different, you've got some different statistics here. So environmental factors were considered most important. And if we ignore the brackets for now, with social issues not far behind, so that's a summary. So we see the summary there. But now if we wanted more information, we're like, well, how do we know that the in this particular research that this was shown, we say 85 listing climate change and 88% environmental protection order of importance. Social issues not far behind, 84% considered it important for fashion brands to address global poverty, and 77% said gender inequality is important. So again, we've given them all the information. They don't have to work for it, and it's right there, really easy for them to follow. Now, again, we have, this is an example of, like, we can start to see this kind of coming together in terms of our header. So launching Kelly Hoppen's highly anticipated inaugural furniture collection retrospective. And then we have our subheading, which gives us a little bit more information. We have where our date and our location would go. We have our opening paragraph, which is a summary of all of that. It's in a nutshell what this whole press release is about. And then we segue into the body copy. And in this body copy, we can again pull out things to make it easy for an editor. You might know that retrospective from the heading is the name of the collection, but if you don't, we've said it again here, retrospective by Kelly Hoppen in this new collection. So we've been very, very, very clear. And as you can see in the body copy, after that opening paragraph, we can get a little bit more, not flowery, we can have a little bit more color and add a little bit more detail because we've told them why we're writing to them at this point in time. Again, this is an example of body copy. These sort of headers break up the body copy sometimes. So we have this one here for body language and also enticing accessories. So those, again, we're looking at like breaking up things. So if an editor just wanted to include some of the content from the body language part of the body copy, or if they wanted to include the details from the enticing accessories, if they have an accessories feature, we're allowing them to orientate themselves within that press release quite easily. Again, if we look a bit closer at this body copy, we can see that they've done the work for us. They've put all these, the prices, the product names are all in the body copy there. You've got the Bordel adjustable Angela dress and the price with some small details about it. And so we've done the work for them. Change the slide. This is back to our Grana press release. Again, we've got our header, our subheader, date and time or date and location, our summary, which here is just a sentence because it's really to the point. We don't need to go into too many details. And then when we go into the body copy, we have a bit more detail that's coming in through there and coloring a little bit more. Here again, we've got this one doesn't have a subheader because it's got quite a functional press release. Header, we've got, again, date and location, a summary of everything that's going to be said, and then a bit more detail as we go down. As you've noticed from a couple of these examples, we have quotes in these press releases. So there's something to say about quotes. I find them very valuable in writing press releases because I think that they add authority, voice, and personality. They make it feel like the press releases come from an actual human being. The problem with quotes is that people don't always know how to handle them when they're writing a press release. So there's a couple of rules. Firstly, they must be attributed to someone. You can't just have floating quotes, a floating quote. Somebody has to have said this. And that, even if that doesn't matter, if it's someone talking across the room and saying to a colleague or a manager or a brand leader, could you give me a couple of points on this, and just writing a quote for someone, you just have to know that someone has said this. Quotes also have to be attributed that you must have permission. After you've attributed the quote to someone, you have to have permission to attribute that quote to someone. You can't just say, oh, well, I wrote one from our CEO. He needs to know that, and he needs to have approval over that as well. The reason being, because if it's a particularly good quote, or if an editor realizes there's somebody who could say something about the content of that press release, they may come to you to ask, I just want to say, I can see that we've received a few questions, and we will come to those at the end of the presentation, if that's all right with everybody. So of course, now when we talk, so back to quotes, you want someone to have permission, because if an editor knows someone is available to speak on the subject, they also need to have had a little bit of media training, because an editor is completely within their rights to call you up and say, hi, brand manager X said this very nice thing about your products. Would I be able to speak to that person, please? And so the person you've quoted needs to be available to speak and should probably know how to speak to the press. And kind of goes without saying, you have to quote an actual person. They have to exist. You can't make someone up, because an editor may follow up with you if that's the case. But if you have someone to do all of these things, it's really cool in a press release, because it does add, as I said, authority, voice, and personality. It makes your press release a lot more human. As we can see here in this Bloomberg press release, Asia Asset Management congratulates Bloomberg as a first-time awardee of the Best Awards. We were impressed by the features and benefits of the firm's web-based platform for KYC reporting requirements for the buy side, said publisher and founder of Asia Asset Management, Tan Lee Hock. So if I was the editor, I should be able to contact Tan Lee Hock if I needed to, even if it was going through the public relations team who sent out the press release, and say, I'd love to ask why he felt the need to comment, what really impressed him, what were the features and benefits that impressed him. That person needs to be accountable. Here's again, you've got Lancome is pleased to announce the appointment of American actress, singer, and fashion authority Zendaya Coleman as the new face of the brand. And of course, we have a quote for Zendaya saying, it's a huge honor to be able to represent a brand like Lancome and join such an incredible lineup of iconic women, says Zendaya. And of course, we should be able to get more quotes and more comments from her, because she has authority. It adds a lot of authority that she's saying this as well to the content of the press release. So we know that she's been appointed as the new face of the brand, but also she exists and she has a voice, which makes it sound a little bit less commercial, if you know what I mean, a bit more authentic. And then to have the Lancome global brand president add, we look forward to a joyous future with Zendaya, whose charisma, influence in film, music, and fashion. But it shows that, okay, we put some consideration into this person we chose, and there's been a human decision process behind this. It just adds a bit of humanity to your press release writing. Boilerplates. Now, this comes at the end of a press release, and it's a funny word, really. Boilerplates should be standardized and official, and they are incredibly useful. You should have a company boilerplate, actually. They're just a really handy thing to have well written. They should contain your company information, the purpose of your company, the size of your company, your presence, like if you have offices in different markets and things like that, maybe a little bit of your ethos and philosophy, and you want to keep them to about 100 words maximum. They make content, and you want to make the content engaging and helpful. They're not like a brand story. It's kind of, again, if the opening paragraph is the content of the press release in a nutshell, the boilerplate is the information about your company in a nutshell. So if we have a look here at examples of boilerplates, as you can see about Lancome, this is a little bit of history. So the visionary pioneer founded the brand in 1935. Today, it's the world's leading luxury beauty brand. It has a presence in 130 countries with over 20,000 beauty advisors. And then these are the different kinds of products that it stocks. You can see for Steelcase, we then have a bit more history about the company as well. For over 105 years, for 105 years, Steelcase has has created great experience for the world's leading organizations, and they demonstrate this through their family of brands. So you're saying this is the context, this is the scope of the company, and you can have a look at how many over 800 dealer locations. Steelcase is a global industry leading and publicly traded company with a fiscal revenue. I mean, like that's even like they've been saying how much they earn. So anyway, so those are very factual boilerplates, and that's kind of how you write a boilerplate. Then we get at the end, underneath your boilerplate, you should have contact information, because editors will have questions, and they should have questions. And if they're good editors, they will have questions. You want to list a real person with a direct contact. If you can avoid it, avoid generic info@xyz.com or kind of company hotline, like 0800 333 or whatever. You want to make sure that somebody feels like when they contact you through your contact information on a press release, they're going to talk to an actual human being about something. It's very important you do that. It makes you seem more authentic. It makes the whole process seem more human, and people are going to be more likely to, and more interested in the information you're sharing. You want to double check all the phone numbers and addresses as well. It seems like a really obvious thing to do, but can you imagine missing out on an awesome publication opportunity because you hadn't checked the phone number? So an editor calls it and goes, I'm not going to try and hunt this down, and gives up. So make sure you double check those sorts of things too. Images. Now, it could be very tempting when you are sending things to an editor to say, like, look at this entire collection of images, this entire portfolio, this entire showcase. They don't have time. They want high quality print ready images. And even for digital, they want to make sure that those are the right quality for digital if they're publishing online. A selection of 2 to 3 maximum is actually probably sufficient, and they will ask you if they want more. If you are sharing images, make sure that you own those images, that you have permission for those images, and that you have captions for those images if possible as well, because caption writing is an art in itself, and it's important that an editor can whack a caption on whenever they're publishing, so you're not getting that misinterpreted. But make sure those are your images that you're sharing. The good thing is that if it seems like a lot of work, but if you do write a really stellar winning press release, it has a lot of mileage, and you can reuse your press release. You can reuse it and recycle it in lots of different ways for your own gain too. So it's not a wasted exercise. Even if there's no guarantee of publicity at the end of it, you don't get an article published after you send out your press release. You don't have to waste it. If you've done it properly, it's valuable. You can put it on the news section of your website as is. You could turn it into a blog. And if you've written that body copy with a slight editorial style and you've made it compelling, it's quite easy to turn that into a blog or an article for your own platforms. You can pull sections of it for social media content and image captions, as you could see way before when we were talking about some of those different homeware products. Some of those descriptions of those homeware products would work beautifully as an Instagram caption if you're sharing a picture of the product. So there's you can get a lot of mileage out of writing a good press release. It doesn't have to be a wasted exercise. Here's a bit of a checklist as we round up. Make sure you have dates on that press release. Make sure you have prices, statistics, names, and accurate titles. Contact information for a real person. It's going to be much nicer to write to Tom or Mandy than it is to info@. Spell check your press release. It's really lazy if you don't just hit spell check. Make sure you have permissions for anything you are sharing, whether that is quotations or images. Follow the brand guidelines of the publication in as far as possible that you can. Try not to force your own stylistic tone and voice and things onto other publications, because they will then have to translate that for their own output. And as mentioned, images, make sure they are the right quality and make sure you have the right permissions to use those. Anyway, thank you so much for that. That was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of press release writing, but I would absolutely love to answer some questions. Erin, were there any questions that came through?
Yes, we actually have several questions coming through, and I'm going to slowly just read them out, and then Cruzy, if you want to take them, go right ahead, and then if not, I'll see if I can answer them the best. Now, the first one's a simple one: is it important to have SEO in mind when writing your press release?
That is a great question. It's a very good question. I would say Yes and no. And the reasons yes and no is if you were writing to a purely digital platform, then I would say it would be a good thing to be mindful of. But of course, the platform itself will have its own SEO requirements. So you're not really thinking SEO for your own brand. Like, of course, if there are keywords that you want to have associated with your brand or your company, you want to make sure you're including those in your press release. But if the organization or the media outlet that you are writing to is, for example, an online magazine, they will have their own SEO guidelines that they will want to be doing. And it's a lot of work for you to try and work out what those are. So I would still stick with prioritizing the information that you want to get across and being clear about the information and not worrying too much about SEO because it's not really specifically relevant to you. You shouldn't have to worry about that because you are not the controller of the platform that you will publish the information. Hope that answers that question.
That's great. Thank you, Cruz. And so we've got, let me see here, another 4 questions. The next one here is there a certain level of accomplishment my startup needs to have before reaching out to the press? So let's say this is a startup and they're wondering at what point should they start reaching out to the press?
That is a really good question, actually. That's a really good question. So I think give yourself some credit. Editors like interesting information. And if you're not sure if something is interesting, look around and see what you find interesting. So for example, if you do something that you think is you've seen other brands or companies talk about, for example, like, filing an IPO or growing, having new offices or an interesting collaboration, that would be great. Even if it's a launch of a unique and interesting concept, that's still interesting. If, for example, your office gets a new plant, or for example, you move offices in the same building or whatever, it's not going to be relevant. So you have to think like an editor and think about the audience, and will their audience find what you're saying interesting? And remember, audiences are just people and you're just a person. So would you find it interesting if you heard it about another company? And if you think, well, maybe not, but I know how to write it in a way that might sound interesting, then yes. So I would have a look at what's already out there and existing. And if you have specific platforms or publications in mind who you would love to write about you, see what they publish about other people, see what they publish about other companies. And if you think that your news is on level with that, on par with that in some way in terms of interest sake, then I think go ahead and write a press release.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you, Cruz. Now, next question here. This is, sorry, that's a statement. He's just saying, this is really great. Thank you. He has a question. How can my startup effectively organize all the different press releases we are sending out? And this is one I'll take. Yeah. And this is actually really key in that the tool you use. It's really, just sending out emails and press releases gets a bit messy. You don't know who's sending, and actually you don't know who's really reading the emails you're sending. And through a press sending tool like Liana Press, it actually allows you to organize your press releases in an easy to read fashion. And you can see not only who's opening your press releases, but as Cruz was saying, you need to add images, you need to add greater details so that if your press release is a product launch or something quite specific that requires a lot of detail, you can attach those items on with a tool like Liana Press. So you can actually track how, each press person, are they opening your images that you've attached? Are they looking at your PDF? So not only does that allow you to see how your press release is being viewed by the press, but you can actually see the interest level so that you can directly contact the editor at a newspaper or the writer at a blog and say, oh, hey, we saw you might have some interest in our press release. Would you like to chat? How can we help? And so that's actually really key, is that the way to organize your press releases is using an online digital press release tool like Liana Press. Now, the next question we have here is, what kind of success stories make good press, and how frequent should you send them? And Cruz, I'm going to leave that one with you.
Yeah. So again, I think you don't want to be, hey, a squeaky wheel gets the oil, but you don't want to be a squeaky wheel and be coming across an editor's desk all the time, because you might seem a little bit desperate. So I think what kind of stories, again, I think it's an assessment of what you think is interesting, and it doesn't have to be massive success. It just needs to be an interesting angle. One thing that I often think is, if you have the publication in mind, and I think this is why something like the Liana Press tool is quite interesting as well, because if you know who you're specifically writing to and the specific publication you're writing to, you're not just blanket sending it to everybody and their dog. You're having a bit more of a targeted approach. You can think a little bit about where that content is going to appear, and look at those platforms and know what kind of sections and where in those sections that where in that publication your information would be relevant. So for example, if there is and this is why it is really important to have targeted press releases. One thing I think that can seem a bit tempting is that you write a press release, you're like, it's so wonderful, and you just send it to absolutely every email address you have. And that is not an effective strategy. That is why the Liana Press tool is quite good, because it just has that ability to be more targeted and to speak specifically to different industries. So you know that, for example, if you are publishing your financial performance, maybe you want to go to a financial magazine or a professional business magazine or a business publication. You may not want to publish your financial performance in a neighborhood magazine with summer camps for kids. That's not going to be somewhere that's interested in that content. So I would say that you want to be confident, but you want to be humble. So look at the publications specifically that you would like to publish your information, and look if they've done something similar. If they've done something similar for somebody else, you can assume that that's something that they're interested in. So, you need to read before you write. We talk about that all the time in copywriting. So I think the same applies here, but it is really important to have a more targeted approach to your press release sending, because even though you may say, for example, be in consumer industries, you may have a beauty brand, for example, and you think, I'm just going to target beauty publications, beauty magazines. Something like Liana can help you there, because it can put them all together. It can give you the context specifically, and you go, well, this is a seasonal trend for us. We're going to share this seasonal trend. We know that beauty magazines and beauty publications are going to be interested in seasonal trends because it's the start of spring or it's the start of winter, or whatever it is. So to send that out to them. At the same time, you may have some slightly different information at one point. You may have hired someone very, very interesting and strategic, and you might want to talk about that. And you might want to target HR publications, or publications that are focused on kind of human capital and things like that. And that's a completely different story. It's a completely different thing to target. And again, you can have a designated list of people who might be interested there. I hope that answered the question. I think that answered the question.
Very detailed, great answer to the question. And just actually, there was a follow-up question about that I missed from before. That was actually about how can one monitor press releases. So it's kind of, I've sent out a press release, how do we actually know if press releases?
Oh, sure. So you don't want to get you don't want to get that dead air. You want to know that something's arrived somewhere, because it is a compelling thing to do. Is when you do work in PR, you can often follow up and say, did you receive this? Would you like any more information? If you're being quite proactive. And like you said, yes. So you want to know, like, who's opened it? Has it actually gotten to where it needed to go? Sorry, I was interrupting you. Please continue.
No. Please. That half answer already answering the point. And actually, one thing that actually helps you in greater details is a monitoring tool as well. So that allows you to actually monitor online media, so that you can actually create keywords monitoring. Certain press agencies, okay, we've sent out this press release to all of these agencies. Now let's start monitoring online traffic to see if there's any new articles that hold keywords that are on your press release. And that's actually something we can help with as well through our Liana Monitor tool. But now we actually have one last question for you, Cruz. It says, hi, Cruz, thank you for sharing. How do you make each press release you write unique and different? Now, as an example, if it's the same product, but in collaboration with different companies. So how do you make it relevant, but not make these different press releases kind of boring or repetitive?
Great question. God, everyone's asking really good questions. So a couple of things. you can have a bit of fun with your headers and your subheaders. So you give a little bit of different angles. Now, if you are doing something like a project collaboration, that's where quotes can be quite interesting. And you can have a little bit of, you can add a little bit of human voice into your press releases, which kind of will pick it up a little bit. So the other thing is to think about problem solution. So editors they have a content calendar to fill non-stop, and press releases are there to help them fill their content calendars. You want to, right? So you want to make their job as easy as possible. So think like an editor. Think, okay, is it summer? What happens in summer? And like it's a creative process, a press release. It is a bit of, it's not an easy thing to write. It's a bit of a challenge. Think like that. So it's summertime right now. What is your product? What is the need that your product fills? How can you reposition that? You can highlight that again. And if you do have like a collaboration again, why are you making the collaboration? If you're collaborating with someone new, and it's the same product, why are you collaborating with them? What makes them special? What makes your product special? What can you both say about each other? You can go back to the Lancome example when you had Zendaya saying, I'm really happy to partner with Lancome because they're great. And Lancome saying, we're really happy to partner with Zendaya because she's great. And it just feels like you're in on a really fun conversation. So that's some different things that you can do. But you don't want to repeat the same structure every time. You do want to try and find fresh angles. So whether that's and it all has to be current. So why now? Why are you telling them about the project collaboration right now? What makes this information something someone needs to publish soon, as opposed to something you could tell them about in a month's time, for example? I hope that answered the question.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Cruz. Now, I do actually have one more. It's actually my question I have about this whole timing scope. So before you were saying, 6 months ahead or 6 months behind, that's way too long. You need to keep relevant. Now, when you're writing a press release about something, what is relevant? Like, what is a time frame? How soon beforehand, before? Anyway.
So what you want to do is you want to look at the publication rates of those publications. So that you can find this if you Google it online. I haven't had a look recently because I've been out of the magazine world for a little while. But if you have a look, you can see what most magazines or publications tend to have a bit of a lead time. Even a digital platform where someone can change the content really, really quickly. Even those sorts of platforms, they will have to do stuff in advance. So you can assume that something that's really, really time sensitive, like that needs to be published immediately, unless it's like obviously actually newsworthy and needs to be a breaking story, which is a bit different than a press release in this particular instance. You can assume that you can send that probably like a couple of days in advance. But for something like a magazine, you want to be kind of thinking like 3 weeks out if you can, to make sure it's still going to be relevant in 3 weeks time. So yeah, you do need to move quite fast with a press release. I mean, that's the challenge. The other thing, as you said, is like in terms of currency and relevance, what can also happen is there's a lot of movement in the world of editorial and publication, and staff change and editors change and people change, and you want to make sure that your contacts are up to date. So I think that's something that Liana is quite good at helping with, as well as ensuring that those media contacts are up to date, because there's nothing like sending out a press release to a bunch of really stale contacts where you get a lot of bounce backs and nobody's there anymore. You want to make sure that you're going to the relevant people, and that those contacts are all up to date and you're connecting with people in the right way.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Cruz. And thank you everyone for attending. I hope you all learned something today. I know I certainly did. And I also wanted to say thank you to Level 3 and Azra for helping us put this together. Now you'll see in the chat, Tyra has just mentioned that Level 3, we recorded this webinar, and it's actually going to be posted on Level 3's YouTube channel. So, if you ever have key takeaways you want to look at later, you can view it online there. And I want to say again, thank you to everyone for joining us. And I'll see you later.
Thank you, everyone.